Good morning. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. It brightens my day. I tell you that every time I see you because it's the truth. And as you know, I'm Craig Portwood, and I happen to be the Associate Vice President for Alumni Main Campus Operations. I get to see you all the time, but you probably noticed we have a very special guest with us today. And if you've been here through the entire year, he's somebody that's somewhat familiar. But this is an American hero and a veteran of the Vietnam War. And this is our good friend, Captain Charlie Plumb from the U.S. Navy. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you.
And as you know from previous experience, and I know from the research and preparation that you have done before you came in here today, that part of Captain Plumb's story is that he spent 6 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and then we are in this 50th year that commemorates Operation Homecoming when our soldiers were brought back home. It's hard to believe it's been 50 years, I'm sure.
True.
So I know you're going to focus tomorrow a little more on the story of all of the pieces that went around being in Vietnam. But I kind of want to focus, if you don't mind, just to kick it off, and then we'll give the cadets an opportunity to chat.
Sure.
If you just kind of share, if you don't mind, just some of the emotions that you and your fellow soldiers experienced when you heard the news that you were coming home.
Obviously, when I was shot down, I yearned for the day I would go home. I was very optimistic. As a matter of fact, I was shot down with just 5 days before the end of my tour. I was aboard the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk, and the ship was ready to turn around and go home in 5 days. The particular strike that I was on was a big deal. It's called an Alpha strike. We had 3 aircraft carriers and 5 Air Force bases, and we were all descending on the same targets in North Vietnam. I mean, it was just amazing to see so many airplanes in the sky going after enemy targets. And just south of Hanoi, the capital city, my F-4 Phantom was blown out of the sky. My co-pilot in my back seat and I ejected, parachuted in enemy hands, hauled into the prison camp, and were tortured for 2 days. But I was so optimistic because I thought that that strike might end the war. It might, because it was a big deal. And I thought this will finally bring the enemy to their knees, and a peace treaty would be signed, and if I fly home, I might beat the ship home. 6 years later.
Wow.
So I was very optimistic, as a lot of the guys were. It was always home by Christmas, and when Christmas didn't come, it was home by Valentine's Day, and then home by Easter, then home by 4th of July, then home by Thanksgiving. Each one of these dates came and went, and we just refocused our hopes and dreams for being home the next holiday. And we always wondered how we would find out we were going home. Now, they tried to trick us many times. They would call us into the interrogation room, and they'd say, you want to go home? Oh, yeah, sure want to go home. Okay, just sign this, and you can go home. And in fact, sometimes they just haul a guy out of there and said, you can go home. And for the most part, we said, no, we're not going home until all the sick and injured guys have gone, all the enlisted guys have gone, and then officers by date of shoot down. In other words, the guys who were there the longest would go home before the guys who were there near the end of the war. John McCain is a good example. John McCain was a senator, as you probably remember. He died a little over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. He was my flight instructor. He taught me to fly jets in Reading, Mississippi. In a Navy training center there. His father, Admiral J.S. McCain, was CINCPAC, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific. His grandfather, John's grandfather, was an admiral as well in World War II. So great naval tradition. And I knew John pretty well and his family. At the Naval Academy, I lived next door to Joe McCain, John's brother. So John was in a prison camp, but he was the son of this big-time admiral. In fact, they called him the Crown Prince. And they offered him early release. Said, you can go. You don't have to sign any confession. Because they were trying to make a big deal of sending home the son of the guy who was in charge of the war. McCain said, hell no, I'm not going home. Send the sick and injured guys home first. The truth of the matter was, he was as injured as anybody I ever saw. He had 7 broken bones when he was shot down. And they were twisting his broken bones to torture the poor guy. He said, I'm not going home. Take your idea and shove it. And he got in a lot of trouble. They put him in solitary confinement for another 2 years because he refused to go home early. But that was part of our code of conduct. Was we will not accept early release. And we didn't. So I kept wondering and waiting and when we would find out for sure that we're going home. And then how would we react? And how would a bunch of old, crusty, grown guys, would we cry when we found out we were going home? Would we cheer? Would we hug and kiss everybody around us? Kept waiting and wondering for how's this going to work. Well, the first indication was they brought in a piece of like wrapping paper. It was their toilet paper, but it was really tough wrapping paper stuff. And they put it on the dirt floor and said, put your foot on there. And so we put our foot on, and he took a pencil, and they traced around our foot. We're going to get some shoes, some real shoes. Of course, we hadn't had a pair of shoes for nearly 6 years. And so they took that away, and about 2 weeks later, they brought in a pair of trousers with a real zipper. Hadn't seen a zipper in 6 years. Ran that zipper up and down and up and down just for fun. And then the camp commander came in and said, you're going home. And we still weren't believing it. Even after he had read the peace treaty to us, which had a paragraph there on the exchange of prisoners of war. We had about 10,000 of the bad guys, and there were 591 of us. And even after that, there was no joy. We were all very somber because we weren't really believing this was going to happen. So we marched out of there. Our senior guy called cadence, hup, 2, 3, 4, is a bunch of crusty old guys, marched to the bus, on the bus, over the dike. This area of Vietnam is very low, and so the airport was around a dike to hold out the Red River. From the top of the dike, we could look down and see the enemy's runway. We knew the enemy's runway. We knew what they looked like from the air. But on the end of the runway, a United States Air Force C-141 sitting there, revved up, ready to wing us away to freedom. And even after we'd seen the star on the side and the flag on the tail of this Air Force airplane, still no response. It wasn't until we climbed aboard the airplane, rolled down the runway, wasn't until we finally lifted off enemy soil, we all broke loose and started hugging and kissing the Air Force nurses. Well, we thought it was funny. It was the pilot of this airplane. In fact, I ran into him just 3 weeks ago. The guy who flew us out of Vietnam. First of all, he circled the fleet. The 7th Fleet, the Navy, aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, supply ships, were all out there in the Gulf of Tonkin. And he made a big circle around the fleet. And the admiral of the fleet contacted the airplane on the radio. Welcome home, you guys. We landed at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. It was kind of interesting because the hospital there had figured out that we probably couldn't digest regular food. I mean, our diet had been 2 bowls of rice a day and some broth. And so the dietitians at the hospital decided that what we would probably want to eat was a bunch of Gerber baby food, mashed up rice. So as I went through the line, you know, I said, how about a big greasy cheeseburger and a chocolate malt?
There you go.
And so sure enough, we got what we wanted. We were, so they made uniforms for us. We were at Clark Air Force Base for 2 days, and they had the tailors there with all of of course we were pretty skinny. I was, I don't know, 130 pounds, something like that. So my regular uniforms wouldn't fit. I'd been promoted twice while I was a prisoner of war. And so they had all my insignia and ribbons and all this stuff, so that when we left Clark Air Force Base, we were looking pretty good. We flew from there to Hawaii, to Pearl Harbor, and then from there we flew into Sacramento at Travis Air Force Base, where Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. And he stood there and he shook every hand of every returning POW on the tarmac at Travis Air Force Base. Now, part of this 50-year reunion, and I mean, we're having things happening all over for this 50th reunion, but part of that was 3 weeks ago at Travis Air Force Base. They have a plaque in the tarmac there of where we stepped off that C-141 at Travis, and they're renaming their terminal there. It's now called Operation Homecoming. Wow. Because of we all came through there 50 years ago. So that's how we learned, and that was how we were brought home. I flew from there then to St. Louis, dropped off some guys, and from there flew to Chicago, where I was hauled into the hospital there in Chicago, Great Lakes Naval Hospital. It was the closest Navy hospital to my home in Kansas, and so that's how it all began.
Wow, wow, that's a piece of history kind of come to life. Things you only read about in books, but hearing about the personal emotion, I think it kind of takes it beyond just pictures that you might have seen. And I know these cadets, I know how intelligent and curious they are. So I know they've also prepared some questions for you. So I figured we'd take a few from them back and forth.
Sure.
I want to remind you that please wait until you have the microphone and trust that our sound booth is going to get it going for you. So just give them half a second. Please make sure that you state your name, tell us what type of cadet you are and where you're from. Make sure you enunciate clearly, and then fire away with your question, and we'll let Captain Plumb kind of jump back at you with some answers. So who's ready for the first question? Sir?
How you doing, sir? Cadet Rose, ECP cadet from Conyers, Georgia. I was wondering, how did you stay so optimistic during these hard times and situations when you were over there, sir?
Good question. How do we stay so optimistic? I think even in the first few months, it became obvious to me that to become pessimistic, to think I was going to die there, it was going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that, when I was first shot down, I really was angry. I was bitter. I was just really enraged at having been shot down, and then being held at bay by the enemy. Most of the guards in a prison, they don't put their best soldiers to guard a prisoner. You got the dregs of the Army there guarding it, and most of these guys were very young. I mean, they looked like teenagers. They looked like 14 or 15-year-old guys. And, of course, they're small. We were easily a head taller than any of the Vietnamese we saw. And so they're light and young, and it was very defeating, just to be held at bay by these guys. And now they weren't stupid at all. In fact, they had more natural intelligence, I think, than we did. But I was just ready to wring their neck. One of the things that happened is that one of these young kids decided he's going to prove to his girlfriend how tough he is. Okay, so he comes in to my cell and starts beating me with his rifle butt and just slamming me around. And his girlfriend was over in the corner of the prison cell laughing at how tough her boyfriend was. And it was this kind of thing that just really enraged me. And then I got communication with a guy who had been there for 2 years. And we would tug on a wire in this secret code. And he would pass around patriotic quotes and Bible verses and poetry. I still know a couple of thousand lines of poetry that this guy passed to me in his code. But one of the little quotes that really made a lot of sense to me at the time was this: acid does more harm in the vessel it's stored than on the subject it's poured. What that meant to me was all this hate and bitterness and vitriol within my body wasn't hurting the enemy, it was hurting me. And at that point, I decided, hey, I think I'm going to live through this, and I'm positive about that, but if I die here, they got to work at it. I'm not going to kill myself by this bitterness, by this negativity. And so that sort of set me on this track of positive thoughts that if I stay positive, then good things will happen. If I resort to negativity and vitriol, then I'm probably going to kill myself.
And I'm sure you're probably familiar with Viktor Frankl and his phenomenal book. It's one I'm just giving you a suggestion now to read this book. It's Viktor Frankl, and it's Man's Search for Meaning. It's a book I read every year at least once. Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor, and he talks in that book, it just paralleled so well with me as you talked about the attitude. Yep. And Victor said, when man understands the deeper sense of meaning that you have, you're able to overcome those adverse circumstances. And I know you've read it, but he talked about how you could see individuals who had given up. Yep. You could see the ones that just drowned in pessimism, he said, and it was days before they passed away. And those that instead maintained a different focus were able to persevere in very adverse circumstances. I certainly think it speaks to the willingness of the human spirit to focus on the positive things you can, even when things are terribly negative.
Very true. And another thing that you learn in a prison camp is forgiveness. I'm a man of faith. My mother was a very devout Christian and taught me a lot about forgiveness. In fact, I was just with my daughter and son over the weekend, and of course they knew my mother, their grandmother, and my daughter said, I never ever heard her say a bad word about anybody, which was true. So she taught me a lot about forgiveness, a good Christian principle. But oh, by the way, it's also a good survival principle. If you can't forgive those who are harming you, if you can't forgive yourself for failing in your mission, if you can't, forgive the mechanic that put your airplane together, if you can't forgive, then you harbor all of this vitriol within you. So, positive thoughts and forgiveness, I think, were the key.
Excellent. Another question. Who's that?
Good morning, sir. I'm Cadet Gooden. I'm an ECP cadet. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. So my question to you is, you talked earlier about a code of conduct between you and other prisoners of war there. Was this something that y'all came up with for each other, or was it something that was like ingrained into you as a soldier or a sailor?
The code of conduct was designed after the Korean War, where we lost a lot of prisoners in Korea. About a third of the guys died there, and largely because they didn't have any direction. Once you're a prisoner of war, lots of things change. When you're in boot camp, you always know the direction. You know exactly what you're supposed to do, and that's a good thing about this school. is that if you don't know what you're supposed to do, ask somebody who's senior. They will tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. As a prisoner of war, you don't really have that direction. So after the Korean War and after the Geneva Convention, which was and is a document signed by most of the countries of the world, have signed on to the Geneva Convention, which says that they're supposed to treat prisoners of war humanely, that there's not supposed to be any torture at camps. So because of that, then the Code of Conduct was designed. Code of Conduct is a code. It's not UCMJ. It's not a military law. It's a code. And being a code, it just means it's between soldiers. It's just you and me have agreed that I will not accept early release. I will make every attempt to escape. I will not accept favors from the enemy. And when I return, when the war is over, I will return in order, okay, of sick and injured enlisted personnel, and then officers by date of capture. And so that's the Code of Conduct. Now, it also says you are only required, that when you're captured, to give name, rank, serial number, date of birth. Those 4 items are the Code of Conduct. And that was that was drilled into my head to the 4 years at the Naval Academy and then the 2 years in flight training. Code of Conduct, Code of Conduct. I will never, ever give more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. And I flew the skies of Vietnam thinking I was tough enough to stick with the code. And I wasn't. The torture was too painful. And so I gave more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. Now, I never gave him any secret. I didn't know any secrets. I'm just a junior officer. I didn't know any military plans. But I certainly gave him more than the code prescribed. And I felt very guilty about that until I found out that everybody else had given in as well, that nobody there was as strong as they thought they would be and as they wanted to be. And so it was somewhat comforting to know, once I got communication with the other prisoners, that we had all fallen short of our task. In fact, I was reading the cadet prayer this morning. And there's a midshipman prayer as well at the Naval Academy. And it's very similar, as a matter of fact, to the cadet prayer. But one of the lines of the midshipman prayer, which kept going over in my mind as a prisoner of war, was, if I should miss the mark, God, give me the courage to try again. And so the Code of Conduct, I wasn't able to stick with the code. God, give me the courage to try again. And that was basically one of the tenets of survival. Is my head is bloody but unbowed.
That's a powerful thought, just recognizing that, hopefully nobody in this room ever experiences the thing you've experienced.
I hope so.
But there are those moments in life when we do miss the mark, when we don't necessarily live up to even our own standards of how we want to conduct ourselves in the way that we want to do things. And you're right, there's an opportunity there when you can either beat yourself up for it and stay down that path of negativity, or you draw a fresh line for today.
That's right. Reestablish
your values and move out and take it as a new opportunity.
It's really, the difference in success and failure in life. It's not getting knocked down. We all get knocked down. The key is, are you going to get up? Do you have the courage to try again?
Wow.
And you see it. And you see it here. You see cadets that fail at something and they just go over in the corner and cry about it. And you see cadets that say, dust themselves off and jump up and they're back at it. They're going to try it again and again and again and again. And sometimes, many, many times you fail. And if you can, it's not the smartest guys and gals that make it. It's the guys that can get up when you get knocked down.
And I, throw in another book at you. I'm an avid reader. I don't know if you're familiar with Angela Duckworth. She wrote the book Grit.
Sure.
Which is another fabulous book just about understanding that to succeed, it's not necessarily, you're right, about who's the strongest, who's the smartest, who's the fastest. It's about having grit, that willingness to understand that, yeah, I'm going to mess some things up. I'm not going to hit everything perfectly. And if you talk to successful leaders, there are successful leaders sitting in the back of the room right here. Your leaders, they'll tell you they didn't get where they are today by doing everything right. They didn't get where they are today by knocking it out of the park every time. To use a baseball analogy, right? Nobody bats 1,000. Your successful people are maybe 30% of the time hitting it in the major leagues, and those are going to the Hall of Fame. How are you then engaging yourself from a leadership perspective and being willing to showcase that grit to keep moving forward even when you don't hit the mark? Other questions? Just get a microphone to them, whoever.
Hello, Captain Plumb. My name is Cadet Ben Alexander Ross Curbo. I'm a Naval Academy scholar myself. And my question for you is, first, after going through something so horrible, I know that you continued your service in the Navy for a little bit after as well. So my question for you is, after going through something so horrible, what motivated you and inspired you to keep serving your country in that branch despite the Navy being in part, or the military in part being the reason you were in that situation in the first place?
It's a very good question. So, you're in the process of getting an appointment to Annapolis. Is that what you said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, super good. In fact, I think I have a lunch with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, great. Looking forward to it. So how do you jump right back into a career that caused you so much pain over such a long period of time? That's pretty much your question, and it's a good question. And it's kind of interesting that the vast majority, I don't know what the percentage, but probably 80% of all of my fellow POWs, probably 80% stayed in the military. We all came back and went back to doing what we felt we needed to do. And first of all, when you have a talent, okay, and God gives us all talents, right? I mean, we all have talents. Maybe you're not cut out to fly a jet airplane, but maybe you're cut out to be a chef, or maybe you're cut out to be an artist or a musician, whatever your talent is. And we all, the POWs for the most part were fighter pilots, okay? This was an air war over North Vietnam. And it was separate from the war in the South Vietnam. The South Vietnam was primarily soldiers, and you're going to induct a graduate here. Is it tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yes.
That was a soldier in South Vietnam. Different war. There were no ground troops in North Vietnam, just airplanes flying over trying to cut their supply route, and to try to take out some of their ammo dumps and industry and bridges. That was kind of my mission. So they got a bunch of fighter pilots in this prison camp. So we had already been through, a lot. We jumped through a lot of hoops, just to get these wings. We had learned to do something that sure enough, we were pretty talented at. It's 23 years old. Okay, I'm flying this Mach 2 airplane, high altitude supersonic interceptor, and flying them off aircraft carriers. Okay, and I really felt good about the talent that God had given me that I could apply to protecting our freedoms and our way of life. And so when I came home, to tell you the truth, I had planned my life while in a prison camp. We had no books to read, no windows to look out, no TV, telephone, nothing, just 24/7 with nothing to do. And so one of the things that I did was I planned out the rest of my life. And so I knew every duty station I'd have, every airplane I'd fly, my wife and kids and vacations and all this stuff went through my mind. And the military was pretty much all I knew and what I knew I could do. And so, it really wasn't even a big question in my mind that I was going to stay in the military. And the other guys felt the same way. And the truth of the matter is, and you're going to have trouble understanding this, but, and we didn't really understand it all at the time, but that 6-year period of time was a very profitable time in my life, psychologically, mentally, even physically. It gave me new direction. And so I don't look back on those 6 years as being, tormented, painful 6 years. I could have spent that 6 years going through med school. I could be a surgeon, with the 6 years that I spent in the prison camp. I could have done, a lot of different things. I could have gone on through grad school pretty easily. I could have had a PhD in the 6 years. But I think that 6 years, without books, without instructors, without computers, without anything else, was more valuable in my life than anything else I could have done. So I look back on it as a positive part of my life rather than a negative part.
Yes, sir.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
You're on.
Okay. Cadet Unano, I'm Naval Academy Self-Prep. I want to ask you, before I ask my question, were you ever confined at the Hanoi Hilton?
Was I there?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So I was just wanting to ask how it really got its name, because it's not stated really anywhere how it got its name.
Okay.
And if you, in your view, that name is kind of, if it lives up to the name.
Yep. Good question. We call it the Hanoi Hilton. One of the things, and again, difficult to believe, is that there was a lot of humor in that prison camp. You guys familiar with ChatGPT, the IA? Okay. Is that the way you write your term papers with that? No. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a computer-based thing that will come up with ideas, with thoughts of entire books. It will write for you if you put in a little bit of information. So I put into ChatGPT, tell me a joke that one prisoner of war would tell another prisoner of war. And the answer was, hey, this cannot be humorous. Prisoners of war don't have humor. It would not give me a joke that one prisoner would tell another. And yet, there were times in that 6 years that I was just, my stomach would hurt. I would be doubled over laughing at something. And so it wasn't all, it wasn't all blood and guts. It was, lots of times we found out that we could have an option. We could cry about it, we could laugh about it. And it was just so much more healthy to laugh about it. So one of the things that we did, and the POW number 2, Bob Shoemaker, good friend of mine, I'll see him this weekend, as a matter of fact, decided that he needed a name for the prison camp that we were in. The name was Wallow. That's a Vietnamese name. Maybe it was built by the French. Maybe that's a French name. But it means fiery furnace, because the Hanoi Hilton, the prison camp in downtown Hanoi, was actually built by the French when they occupied Vietnam. And so they built this prison to keep all the Vietnamese dissidents in that prison. And they had a guillotine right in the prison camp. Wow. And so that's where they kept us. But Bob showed up as POW number 2, and he said, we got to be able to communicate with each other and talk to each other. And so we named all the guards. Okay, we had the Rat, we had Babyface, we had a guy we called AB. That stood for afterbirth. We decided his mother threw away the kid and kept the afterbirth. Gosh. And So we had all these names. And so we decided, we're going to name this prison camp the Hanoi Hilton. And so it was a humorous thing. And within the Hanoi Hilton, we had all of these casinos, okay? The Las Vegas casinos. We had Caesar's Palace, we had Stardust, and all these various. And so everywhere we went, we would name things because we didn't really know the real name. We just made up a name. And so we had kind of our own little society and our own little language. Now, one of the things that troubled me, my degree is in engineering, and it troubled me that I couldn't measure things. Because I didn't have a ruler, I didn't have a yardstick, I didn't have a clock, didn't have a scale. I didn't know what a pound was, or a thermometer, didn't know what a degree Fahrenheit was. And so I decided to establish the POW Bureau of Weights and Measures, because we didn't care what the rest of the world thought an inch was. We were going to have a POW inch and a POW degree. Now, how would you make a thermometer in a prison camp? Anybody got any ideas? Go ahead. Alcohol. If you had alcohol, you might do that. Had no alcohol, but that's a good guess. Anybody else have an idea? Come on, you physics students.
However much you sweat.
How much you sweat? Okay, I like your creativity. Let me tell you how I did it. In one of the cells that I was in a lot of different prison cells, and one of them had a really high ceiling with a light bulb dropped down there on a twisted pair of wires, okay, down to this light bulb. And so I took a little piece of rice, mashed up rice. I threw it against that light bulb to make a mark so that it cast a shadow on the floor of where this was. As the temperature increased and the wire would extend, it would unwind. When it was colder, it would contract and it would wind back up. So I had this shadow on my floor. It was kind of like a vernier gauge there that would tell me. And then I would mark off what I thought was a degree. So I had a POW degree Fahrenheit.
I don't know that anybody would have guessed rice on a light bulb as the way to, anybody even close in your minds on that one? I didn't think so. ChatGPT would not have created that.
No, probably not.
Another question. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Cadet Bancourt from Naples, Florida. I'm an ECP cadet here. Sir, I wanted to know what was the hardest thing to adapt to when you came back home?
Good question. What was the hardest thing to adapt to? You know, I was like Rip Van Winkle. I'd actually been gone for a total of 7 years. And so when I left the States, a well-dressed guy had, a short hair, a flat top. You know, that was the deal, to have a flat top in your head, and a skinny little tie about that wide. And when I came home, things had changed. The styles had totally changed. Instead of close-cropped hair, this is sort of in the beatnik generation, that a well-dressed guy had hair down the middle of his back. So from the hospital in Chicago, I escaped from the hospital. And I rented a car, and I'm out driving down the highway. And I see up in front of me a good-looking blonde, and I drive up next to her, and she's got a mustache. Styles, language, music, everything had changed. Probably the toughest thing was I had married my high school sweetheart, lovely blonde girl from Kansas, after the Naval Academy, and she hung on for 5 years, then filed for divorce 3 months before I came home. So that was kind of that was another gut punch for me, coming home to that kind of because I had planned the rest of my life around her. and around us and building a family and all that stuff. So that was probably the most difficult thing that I had to get used to was being a bachelor again.
Another question.
Sir. Good morning. How are you? Jordan Cruz, State Service Cadet from Atlanta, Georgia. My question is, how did it feel knowing you were able to communicate with other prisoners next to you?
Good question. Communication was absolutely vital. Life and death vital. The guys that couldn't communicate usually didn't make it. And so it was joyful, just to have communication with somebody else. Because when you're in solitary confinement, particularly in some of the cells, there was no light. And if you were in the mountains, it was dark all the time. You couldn't distinguish red from green. It was so dark. And when you're in solitary confinement and dark, you lose track. You don't know what's a real memory, what's a hallucination of a memory. Sometimes you wonder if you're even alive or dead. There's nothing to prove to me that I can pinch myself, but there's no feedback. There's no sounding board. There's nothing to tell me for sure that I'm alive. And you really begin to wonder, what's going on? And the simple tugging on a wire or tapping on a wall with this code that we were in, and have somebody tap back to you or tug back on the wire it was a lifeline. It was validating my own physicality. It was proving to me that I was alive. Just tugging on a wire to have that wire tugged back. Meant, number one, somebody's responding to something I'm doing physically. Okay, thus I exist. Number two, somebody over there cares. Somebody cares about me enough to tug back on a wire. So it was just, communication was vital. As it is in life, I mean, imagine if you couldn't communicate, if you were set apart in a box somewhere. I mean, most people, when they're alone, can't stand it for 15 minutes. You gotta to light up your cell phone. You gotta turn on some music. You gotta do something to keep your mind active. And so when you've got 24/7 with nothing to do, communication is absolutely just vital. So thanks for that question.
Well, and that speaks, I think to something I've shared with the cadets a while ago. One of the three core needs of who we are as humans is community. And that's an absolutely essential part of who we are, that we have to have that connection with other people. And sometimes in dire circumstances, you find it however you can find it. If it's tugging on a wire, that lets you know you're not alone. Somebody's there with you. That's enough to give you a little more strength to keep pushing forward that day.
True that.
Other questions?
How are you, sir?
Yeah.
How are you, sir? Mercer Clark, Civic Leader Cadet from Johns Creek, Georgia. I was curious what an average day at camp looked like and what you guys would do to maybe try and pass some time.
Good question. What's the average day in the camp? Kind of depended on the camp and what your situation was, but they'd wake you up with a gong. There was a gong in every camp. It was like a piece of metal hanging from a tree, and they would bang on this thing to get you up. And so you'd wake up, and usually what we would do is some physical activity. We would do calisthenics, running in place, isometrics. Our toilet was a 2-gallon bucket, which was a real irritant. As you can imagine, it was rusted out and wasn't a lid on it at all. And so, but when that bucket, and we got to empty this thing every 2 or 3 days, so it filled up. And so one of the things that we did to exercise was to do curls with our bucket. And so, that was maybe an hour or so. Then, depending on who you were with, you would go into usually some academics. We taught each other things that we had learned. We had guys in there who had master's degrees and some PhDs. In fact, one of my favorite guys there had actually taught at the Air Force Academy. So he was a teacher, and he could teach us things. I taught a course in sailing, being a naval officer. I mean, can you imagine trying to learn how to sail by listening to taps on a wall? It was very encouraging, because about 3 or 4 months after we came home, I get this call from one of my students. And this guy said, Charlie, I just rented a boat. I can sail. So that lasted until about 10 in the morning. 10 in the morning, you got your first meal, and it was a bowl of rice and sometimes some broth. And then about noon, the guards took their siesta. They kind of left you alone from noon until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so then we came out again and started teaching each other things. Or we would pass around patriotic quotes and Bible verses and poetry and this kind of thing, just for fun. Then you got your second and last meal of the day at about 2. So there's 4 hours between your 2 meals. And then you had a 20-hour stretch with nothing to eat. So it's the type of thing you get used to, but we got pretty hungry, especially at first. Then afternoon, usually more exercise, and the evening was showtime. It was a different movie every night, at least if you had a roommate or 2 or 3. We told each other movies we had seen or books we had read. And it was really interesting because I remember one of my roommates had read the book Dr. Zhivago. Dr. Zhivago is a long book, you know, and it's a long movie. And he would tell this story, Dr. Zhivago's story, a very interesting story. But it would last maybe 15 minutes, and he was finished. That's all he could remember. But the guy would lay back on his board bed every day and think about this movie. And so I lived with him about 5 years later, and his 15-minute movie had gone to like a 5-hour spectacular. And the rating had gone from PG to X. So that was pretty much our day. We were the only time we were ever outside. The first 5 years I was there, the only time I was ever outside was to dump the bucket, or we would let us bathe. And at the beginning, when I was first there, it was like once a month. You got and it wasn't really bathing. They put you in this room that had a big vat of dirty water, and that's all you had: cold water. Cold, dirty water. And I'll tell you this, every time I take a hot shower, I think of how lucky I am to take a hot shower. Because 6 years without a shower, you learn to appreciate little things in life. I see a question here. Somewhere, did I see a microphone? Go ahead.
Good morning, sir. My name is Jackson Mamick, Coast Guard Academy scholar from Alabama. And my question is to you is kind of what you're talking about with the hot showers is after that like life experience being 6 years with just life being terrible like that, what is it like now where like things that you used to like hate or mundane things, do they become like more enjoyable? Do you like look back and just like what is that like for you? I guess kind of like with the hot shower.
Thanks for that question. I have a great life. You know, I live every day to the fullest. I'm a very active guy. I'm a pilot. I still fly. I have 2 little airplanes. I have an antique airplane from World War II, and I have an experimental airplane. I look back at the positive parts of the POW experience and not the negative parts, and like taking a shower every day. The only thing that really bugs me, it was kind of interesting. I had an interview. I've done a lot of national TV, and Diane Sawyer has been, you know, a long-time TV person, and she's interviewing me on national TV. She said, "I want you to listen to this sound," and tell me what you think. And she played this sound of a squeaky door. And she said, what do you think? I said, sound like a squeaky door. She said, yeah, but doesn't that, like, you know, send electric volt through your spine? You know, don't you get excited when you hear a squeaky door? Because that's, you know, the guards coming in to beat you up. I said, no. I said, that's not it. The jingle of keys, that's what gets your attention, because that's the first thing you hear is the jingle of keys before the squeaky door. So, and you know, when I hear jingling keys now, it's probably about the only thing that really is a negative memory of the prison camp is the jingle of those keys. But no, I mean everything else. I live life being thankful for the blessing of freedom.
Other questions? Right here.
Morning, sir. Cadet Mensa, 11 Bravo. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I was just wondering, I'm going to be deploying next year. I was wondering what was going through your head, like, what was the emotions, what were you thinking before deployment, like, and did you ever think, like, you were going to get caught?
There are emotions before deployment?
Yes, sir.
I was really excited to get out there and do what I knew how to do, and we were all excited. You know, I knew very few guys. In fact, there was nobody in my squadron that was afraid of combat. In fact, my job, besides being a pilot, and in the Navy, every pilot has another job. You know, you're either a maintenance officer, you know, or you're a schedules officer, and I was a schedules officer. So I got to schedule all these pilots on all of these flights. And we had 17 pilots in the squadron, and so I knew these guys pretty well. And they would come to me, being the schedules officer, and want to be on these flights and be disappointed when I didn't schedule them to fly. So everybody was really gung-ho. And to the most part, we weren't afraid at all. And so, you know, going into combat was something that we really felt strongly about, that we had a mission to perform, and we knew how to do it. You know, send me in. And that was pretty much my attitude at all. Now, during the war, during my deployment, we lost about a fourth of our pilots, killed or captured. And even when a guy was killed or captured, I mean, it didn't seem to put a wet blanket on us. You know, we were out there ready to go again. You know, again, it's getting up and staying positive.
If I could, I was going to transition one more. Okay, just. Oh, yes, sir.
So, if one, have you been back to Vietnam? And two, if you sat down with your guards, what would you want to talk about?
Okay, good question. Well, first of all, my kids have always assumed that if I ever saw one of those guards, or especially the camp commander, the guy who was in charge of our torture, that I would punch him out, you know. No, that's not going to happen. And I don't think they believed me. But back to the forgiveness thing, okay? I forgave those guys within months. There was never any animosity towards these guys. I didn't have an axe to grind with these guys. They were fighting for their country just like I was fighting for mine. I didn't agree with what they were doing, but oh, by the way, I'm not going to hate them for that. And so about 10 years ago, I had the head of the history department at the University of Hanoi, North Vietnam, invite me to come over there, you know, a POW coming back to the place where I was held prisoner. And he said he wanted me to meet some of the fighter pilots that I had combat with. I'd get in these dog fights with these enemy pilots. And he wanted me to meet the camp commander, the rat, the guy who was in charge of all of our torture. And I said, nah, thank you, but no thank you. I've been there, done that. Don't have much interest. He kept bugging me to come over. He wanted, and then finally he said, the camp commander is in his late 80s. He may not live very long, and he really wants to see a prisoner of war. And oh, by the way, we'll give you and your family paid vacation, you know, to Vietnam. Okay, we'll do that. So 6 years ago, I took my wife and 3 of our 4 kids back to Vietnam. And it's a beautiful country, and you know, and they love Americans. It's really, it was a very nice vacation. So they took me to see the fighter pilots. I had 3 fighter pilots, and they didn't speak any English, and I don't speak any Vietnamese. But we laid out an aeronautical chart, okay, where we were, and I'm coming this way, and you're coming that way, and then the other guy's coming this way, and we got into this dogfight, and tried to replay this whole thing. And the truth was that we couldn't agree on who got the best of who. I mean, nobody was shot down that day, but yet they claimed to have shot me down. I didn't get shot down till a month later, and it was a surface-to-air missile that brought me down. It wasn't a jet. But so anyway, and then I went to see the camp commander, and my kids still thought that I'd punch this guy out, and so I went to this guy in his home. He has kind of a shack on the edge of a river, and first thing he wanted to do was to hug me. Not exactly, you know, an Asian thing to do, but he wanted to hug me. And he stepped back and he said, I just want to tell you that I was your warden from 1968 to 1972. My proudest achievement was to keep you healthy and happy. I said, wait a minute, Bubba. It's me. You don't remember me? We spoke for probably an hour. He never, ever admitted hurting an American. And I said, where'd I get these scars? How come I have only one testicle? You know, tell me how that happened. And to this day, I don't know why. I don't know whether, I mean, I'm sure he knew that was going on. I mean, I never saw him personally during the torture sessions. It was all these goons that he had working for him. And so I don't know if it was that he didn't know about it, or maybe he was afraid to ever admit because he would be tried for war crimes if they found out that they had tortured Americans. So, and then he said, wait here. He went back to his kitchen. He brought out homemade beer in a Pepsi bottle. I found that to be a little amusing. Not bad beer.
Well, if we have time for one more, I just want to kind of, if you don't mind,
Sure.
talk a little bit about the White House dinner
Sure.
with President Nixon, which
Sure.
I mean, you maybe have seen some of the footage and some of the research you've done your preparation for Operation Homecoming. But you just kind of talk about how all that came together and kind of the emotions at that, if you would, for just a few minutes.
To begin with, if you looked, you know, any of the history of Vietnam, you've probably seen that the soldiers in Vietnam during the war came back to a really negative situation. I mean, you think our country is split now, but during the Vietnam War, there was the anti-war people and the pro-war people, and boy, they were, I mean, it came to some deaths, as a matter of fact. Some people got killed because of the riots and the demonstrations that were going on. So when the soldiers came back from Vietnam, a lot of them were spit on. They couldn't wear their uniforms. They were called baby killers, and it was a terrible, terrible thing. But when the war ended and we came home, it was about the only thing that could unite the country, because whether you were pro-war or anti-war, everybody wanted the POWs to come home. And so it was happiness for us. In fact, we didn't really know that the soldiers had come home to such a negative environment until, until we learned about it after we came home. We felt somewhat guilty because we were getting these ticker tape parades and all these gifts, from everybody. Ford Motor Company gave me a brand new car. I got tickets to the World Series. We were treated as heroes when we came home. And in fact, I wrote my book. I wrote my autobiography when I came home. The title of the book is "I'm No Hero," because we felt that everybody else, who came home was treated poorly. They should be the ones that were getting the kudos and accolades, and we were getting it. So, and part of that was just political. The president wanted to bring the country together, and so he made a big deal of the POWs coming home. And one of the things he did was to serve the largest dinner the White House has ever served to date. That we were the biggest meal that was ever served at the White House on the 24th of May of 1973. Well, the 24th of May next month, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have the 50th year to the date reunion at the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, California. And they have a big ballroom in the library where they're going to put the same china, the same silver, the same chandelier that we ate on 50 years ago. And the rumor is they're going to serve the same meal, which wasn't all that great. I mean, chicken fried steak at the White House.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you sharing your memories and giving our cadets an opportunity to interact. And I know that Captain Plumb will stick around for a few minutes. I know some of you need to get off to class and do some other things, but you can certainly come down front and ask him some questions. And then tomorrow, we'll be back in here at 10 a.m. for our Vietnam Veteran 50th Anniversary Commemoration. You'll hear his full story, and we'll also have some of our Vietnam vets in attendance that we'll have an opportunity to recognize as well. So on behalf of the Corps Cadets and our Commandant, sir, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good being with you. Oh, it sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. Good to be with you. Thanks. All right. Look at that.
We've got some posters too.
All right.
There you go.
Well, photo op.
Thank you so much, sir.
All right, Cadet Good.
Nice.
The Corps is yours.
Look at that.
Sir.